sister. Well, it's also his half-sister as well, but he conveniently leaves that part out. Well, Jonadab said, I'll tell you what to do. Go back to bed and pretend you are ill. When your father comes to see you, ask him to let Tamar come and prepare some food for you. Tell him you'll feel better if she prepares it as you watch and feeds you with her own hands. Okay. Amnon is the next king. Understand that, okay? He's the oldest son. Solomon's not the oldest son. This is the oldest son. So Amnon is now David's oldest son. He's the one that's going to be the next king. And what does the next king of Israel want to do?
Rape his sister.
He wants to sleep with his sister. He's got intense physical desire for his sister. He lusts after Tamar, who is David's daughter, by another wife. Remember, David had 3 wives. We've talked about 2 of them. We kind of skipped over the third one because all she did was have kids. So she don't count. So anyway, so Tamar is Amnon's the only one he really loved was Abigail. Bathsheba, I think he has some great feelings for Bathsheba. I think while they went through, they developed a close relationship. But I think the only one he really loved, just reading the story in Samuel and Kings, was Abigail. But anyway, so he lusts after Tamar, who is David's daughter by another wife. So Tamar is Amnon's half-sister. He is so consumed by this, the Bible says he's physically ill. Now, a relative notices. David does not notice. This is an interesting dynamic. David does not know what's going on in his own family. We're going to find that out as this story progresses. But a relative does, a cousin, and sees that Amnon is miserable and pale, and so what's up? And Amnon tells him, and together they develop this plot that Amnon will pretend to be ill, get Tamar to bring food to him, and then he's going to lure her into his bed. Verse 6. So you got to realize you're going to get an R-rated Bible study, did you? Well, now we're going to the next level. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be sick. And when the king came to see him, Amnon asked him, please let my sister Tamar come and cook my favorite dish as I watch. Then I can eat it from her own hands. So David agreed, because David didn't have a clue what was going on. So David agreed and sent Tamar to Amnon's house to prepare some food for him. When Tamar arrived at Amnon's house, she went to the place where he was laying down so he could watch her mix some dough. Then she baked his favorite dish for him, chicken and dumplings. No, it doesn't say that with baking the dough. But when she set the serving tray before him, he refused to eat. Everyone get out of here, Amnon told his servants. So they all left. Then he said to Tamar, now bring the food into my bedroom and feed it to me here. So Tamar took his favorite dish to him, but as she was feeding him, he grabbed her and demanded, come to bed with me, my darling sister. How's that for words of love to have sex with somebody? Come have sex with me, sis. No, verse 12. Oh, it gets worse. Just hang on, folks. Verse 12. No, my brother, she cried. Don't be foolish. Don't do this to me. Such wicked things aren't done in Israel. Where could I go in my shame? And you would be called one of the greatest fools in Israel. This is the next king of Israel. Please, just speak to the king about it, and he will let you marry me. How's that for a solution? Man, what a family. But Amnon wouldn't listen to her. Now remember, when Abigail gave David good advice, she said, if you do this, it's gonna hurt you as a king. David took the advice. She says to Amnon, if you do this and you become king, you're going to become a fool to everybody. He says, I don't care. So verse 14, but Amnon wouldn't listen to her, and since he was stronger than she was, he raped her. Then suddenly, now look at this, he rapes her, okay? Verse 15, then suddenly Amnon's love turned to hate. Does that sound like a man? He got what he wanted. Then suddenly, he wasn't sick anymore. In fact, he wasn't even in love anymore. Then suddenly Amnon's love turned to hate, and he hated her even more than he had loved her. Get out. Yes, Pastor Lana.
Reminds me of the song in the 60s, but will you love me tomorrow?
That's right. He wouldn't even love her for the rest of the night.
No.
I mean, in fact, he goes, get out of here. And the Hebrew word there is where we get the word snarled. So he snarled at her. No, No, Tamar cried. Sending me away now is worse than what you've already done to me, because she's no longer a virgin. Nobody's going to want her. But Amnon wouldn't listen to her. He shouted for his servants and demanded, throw this woman out and lock the door behind her. So he's throwing her out to the street. Remember, this is his house. So the servant put her out, locked the door behind her. She was wearing a long, beautiful robe, as was the custom in those days for the king's virgin daughters. But now Tamar tore her robe and put ashes on her head, and then with her face in her hands, she went away crying. Now, David is so clueless about what's going on in his family, he doesn't even notice all this. Can you imagine that going on in your family? And as the dad, you don't even see what's happening? Would y'all say this is a dark story? Yeah, this is a dark story. And in the NIV it says, and Amnon hated her with an intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he loved her. You're not going to see that put on anybody's dining room wall, or embroidered in a pillow. Okay, that's just not going to happen. That's just going to happen. Now, I want you to notice something. He called his personal servant and said, get this woman out of here, and bolted the door after her. Notice how he referred to her. Not get my sister out of here. Get this woman out of here. Now, we're the same way when we want to treat somebody badly. All you got to do is depersonalize them. There's us, and then there's who? Them. And we all know who them are, don't we? Oh, yeah. It's funny that everybody's got a different definition of them. But we depersonalize them. This happens. In our family, if one of our kids did something good, Annie would say, that's my baby. That's my boy. I'm so proud of him. I'm so proud of him. One of my kids messes up, like he steps on a rake to see if cartoon physics works, and then he says, look at your son. So, we see a lot of this in the Bible. Amnon's doing that here. So the servant put her out and bolted the door after her. Now I want you to think about it. Think about the time in Tamar's life when she went into the house and now when she leaves the house. How her life is just totally changed, completely ruined. It's fried. And she's about the one person in the world in this whole sordid story that shows any integrity and courage. So you know what she does? She goes and tells her dad about it, right? So verse 21, when David heard what had happened, he was very angry. And though Absalom never spoke to Amnon about this, he hated Amnon deeply because of what he had done to his sister. Now you think of sibling rivalry, this is going to go a lot deeper than that. Now here's the thing about it is, in this culture, that took courage for Tamar to go to her dad and accuse the future king of Israel for doing this. She tells the truth at great risk. To her, she could be considered, the one that led him on. She can be put to death, but she trusts her dad. So she goes and she waits for David, who's got all the power to do whatever he wants to do, just to show a little amount of courage. And it says David got mad, but then we read the rest of the story, and guess what we find out what David did? Nothing. Remember Sunday morning I said we're doing a Bible study today called Bad Dad? Well, now you see where I'm just getting that from. Verse 20. Her brother Absalom saw her and asked, is it true that Amnon has been with you? So obviously everybody knows. Everybody, even David. Everybody knows. Well, my sister. Notice he calls her his sister. Well, my sister. Keep quiet for now, since he's your brother. Don't you worry about it. So Tamar lived, and the word there is she lived as a desolate woman. As a desolate woman, but she lived in her brother Absalom's house. So her brother took her in. Now Absalom is Tamar's full brother, okay? So he finds out what's happening, invites her in. Now, so notice, David did not take her in. I want you to point that out. It had to be her brother that took her in. David didn't want her in the palace. Kind of get the feeling David's kind of on Amnon's side here a little bit, but anyway, let's go on. So days go by, and then weeks go by, and then months go by, and Tamar, it says in the Bible, surely the king would do something. Surely my father would take action. Let's see what happens. What we know in verse 21, it says when King David heard all this, he was furious. But why didn't David do something? Was it because he was so preoccupied with doing kingly stuff? I mean, this is his family. Let's look at Amnon's behavior. He lusted after a woman. He wanted her. He took her. And he thought he could use his own power and his own position to take what he wanted from her and then discard her. Have we ever heard a story like that in this family? Could it be the reason David didn't do anything? Because David was feeling pretty guilty himself. Because David had done the exact same thing that Amnon had done. He had. The exact same thing. So I think that's why David didn't do anything. Guilty, embarrassed, shamed, compromised. Because as soon as he says something, Amnon's going to go, well, let's talk about you and Bathsheba. For whatever reason, when he needed to do something, David did nothing. Now, 2 years pass. We're going to jump ahead a little bit. 2 years is 2 years of humiliation for Tamar. 2 years of David being mad, but he does nothing. He does nothing. But remember, she's got a brother named Absalom. And Absalom spends those 2 years plotting and planning. So let's pick up the story at verse 24. 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep were being sheared at Baal Hazor near Ephraim, Absalom invited all the king's sons to come to a feast. David's got, I think, 4 sons at this point. He went, 4 sons. Maybe 3 sons. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that one. He's got 3 or 4 sons. Okay, anyway, he went to the king and said, my sheep shearers are now at work. Would the king and his servants please come to celebrate the occasion with me? And David only had 3 sons, by the way. That's right, 3 sons. The king replied, no, my son, if we all come, it would be too much of a burden on you. So Absalom pressed him, but the king would not come, though he gave Absalom his blessing. Okay, so he says, I'm inviting my other 2 brothers to come. Who are the other 2 brothers? Solomon and Amnon. And he invited the king. David said, I can't make it. But Absalom kept on pressing the king until he finally agreed to let all his sons attend, including Amnon. So Absalom prepared a feast, and I love this because whoever wrote this has a sense of humor. Because it says, so Absalom prepared a feast fit for a king. Isn't that good? You got to look for that kind of stuff in the Bible. There's a lot of funny stuff in the Bible. And if you don't laugh about it, you're going to have to talk to Jesus about that one day. So Absalom told his men, wait until Amnon gets drunk. Boy, this sounds familiar, Pastor Lennox. Let's get somebody drunk. That's never happened in this family before, has it? Absalom told us, wait until Amnon gets drunk, then at my signal, kill him. Don't be afraid. I'm the one who's given the command. Take courage and do it. So if David wouldn't do anything, Absalom says, I'll do it. I'll take command. And there's a reason that word command is in there. So at Absalom's signal, they murdered Amnon. Then the other son of the king jumped on his mule and fled. Well, okay. As they were on their way back to Jerusalem, this report reached David. Absalom has killed all the king's sons. Not one is left alive. The king got up, tore his robe, threw himself on the ground. His advisors also tore their clothes in horror and sorrow. But just then, Jonadab, remember him, the son of David's brother, Shimei, arrived and said, no, don't believe that all the king's sons would be killed. It was only Amnon. So we don't care. It was just Amnon. Absalom has been plotting this ever since Amnon raped his sister Tamar. No, my lord the king, your sons are not all dead. It was only Amnon. Meanwhile, Absalom escaped. Absalom does something. Why? Because he says his father's too gutless to do something. If David had stepped in as a dad and took care of this, none of this would have happened. None of this would happen. And unfortunately, thousands of years later, I still see the same scenario played out in family after family after family, where the dad does not step up. In fact, I've seen it where the dad he says, I can't take this. He'll get a divorce, he'll leave, instead of stepping up and taking responsibility for his own children. So we still have this. But anyways, Absalom gets his brother Amnon away from the capital, because remember, he's the next heir. He's the prince. So he's got plenty of bodyguards and king's guards and everything else. So he gets him away from all that at the capital. Then he gets him drunk. Now, if we remember the story of David's life, you know the story of somebody who had another man who was in the way of a woman that he wanted, and he got that man drunk. Y'all remember Uriah the Hittite? We all remember that, David and Uriah. So Absalom avenges his sister, kills his half brother. Are there any laws about doing that kind of stuff? A few, and a few. And like I said, Amnon was at this point the oldest son. So Absalom not only killed his half brother, he just killed the heir to the throne. Now think about that. Now, if there's 3 sons, and Solomon is the youngest, then who would be the next son in line for the throne?
Absalom.
What a coincidence. It's Absalom. So this works out pretty good for this guy, doesn't it? He kills his half brother, who's the next oldest son to be the heir of the throne. So Absalom is now the heir apparent. But he's got to run away. I mean, there's murder charges against him. Not just murder charges. He's killed the crown prince. So he runs away. And the Bible tells 1 Kings, like I said, I'm just going to skip under some of the stuff, but it says he lives 3 years in exile. So 3 years, Absalom runs away. Verse 39 says, and King David, now reconciled to Amnon's death, longed to be reunited with his son Absalom. In the NIV it says, and the spirit of the king longed to go to Absalom. Now for 3 years, Absalom's on the run, right? David says, I need to talk to my son. Do you think he needs to talk to his son about what's happened? You don't think there needs to be a come to Jesus moment in this family? But what does David do for 3 years? Nothing. He stayed home. He did nothing. 3 years. But he longed to go to Absalom. It says the spirit of the king longed to go, but he didn't go. So finally Joab, he's the chief of staff, he intervenes, and he gets David to promise that if Absalom comes back to Jerusalem, that he won't be harmed. So David makes that promise, and then David makes another enormous mistake. Now we're 1 Samuel 14. This is verse 21, 1 Samuel 14, 21. So the king sent for Joab and told him, all right, go and bring back the young man Absalom. Notice what he called him. Think about that. We'll come back to that in a minute. Come back and bring the young man Absalom. Joab bowed with his face to the ground in deep respect and said, at last I know that I've gained your approval, my lord the king, for you have granted me this request. Then Joab went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. But the king gave this order, Absalom may go to his own house, but he must never come into my presence. So Absalom did not see the king. I've seen this in too many families. All somebody needs to do is pick up the phone. So all they got to do is pick up the phone. And will they pick up the phone? No. For years and years and years. And never talk to that person in their family. Never talk to them. That one line, so Absalom did not see the king. I think of the prodigal son. Remember that story? The prodigal son's coming home, and what did the father do? Ran out to meet him. Runs to him. Can't wait to see him. That's the heart of a dad. Absalom is coming home, and what does the heart of his father say? Don't come into my presence. I don't want to see you. I don't want to see your face. I don't want to hear your voice, nothing. The king said he must go to his own house. He must not see my face. He must not see my face. There are times, I got 3 boys, as you know, and you always have one, right? And there was times that I had, my boys got in trouble. Or my boy got in trouble. And I'd have to go get him. And guess who was the last person he wanted to see? Was me. But his mama wasn't going to get him. No one's going to get him. No, that's my job. And I went and got him, and guess what? He didn't want to see me, but then after he saw me, it was the best thing for him. best thing for me. That's what dads do. That's what dads do. He needed to see my face. Let me tell you something. Absalom, why did Absalom do this? His sister got raped. So think about, don't you think somebody needed to listen to him? Don't you think he's still, even after 3 years, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of hurt, a lot of hatred, a lot of anger, a lot of love? Don't you think it's all messed up inside him? He did not see his father's face. In other words, David was not there. You know, I always think about this every time I say, who needs to see my face? You know, sometimes there's just people that need you to see. Okay, so David lives in the same city with his father. His heart is breaking. And this goes on for 2 more years. So now it's been 5 years since the event. Thank goodness she didn't get pregnant, unlike Bathsheba. But anyway, so Absalom is in the same city as his father. His heart is breaking. For 2 years, there's this wall between them, and he never sees his father's face. And it actually drives Absalom crazy. Absalom wants to see his dad so bad. And this is something that I see in families, again, thousands of years later. See if y'all can pick out what's going on here. This is verse 25. Now, Absalom was praised as the most handsome man in all Israel. This is a good-looking family, like I said earlier. His dad said, David was called beautiful. Absalom's called beautiful. Tamar was called beautiful. But here's the thing, as beautiful as David was, Absalom is even more beautiful. He was praised as the most handsome man in all Israel. He was flawless from head to foot. He cut his hair only once a year, and then only because it was so heavy. When he weighed it out, it came to 5 pounds.
Oh my God.
So he got his hair cut once a year, and it was 5 pounds worth of hair. Anyway, let's get down to verse 28. Absalom lived in Jerusalem for 2 years, but he never got to see the king. Then Absalom sent for Joab to ask him to intercede for him. But Joab refused to come, and Joab was right. Joab is not his dad. Joab says, that's not my job. Okay? So Absalom sent for him a second time, but again Joab refused to come. So Absalom said to his servants, go and set fire to Joab's barley field, the field next to mine. So they set his field on fire as Absalom had commanded. Then Joab came to Absalom at his house and demanded, why did your servant set my field on fire? And Absalom replied, because I wanted you to ask the king why he brought me back from Geshur if he didn't intend to see me. I might as well stay there. Let me see the king. If he finds me guilty of anything, then let him kill me. Now, I have seen kids act out in families, and I'm going to tell you the number one reason they were acting out. They wanted to get the attention of a parent. And that's the only way they could get their parents' attention, was to act out. So that's what he did. He burned down the field because he wanted to talk to his dad so bad. He was willing to do something like this. Today's somebody might break, shoplift or steal a car or something, whatever, to get their parents' attention. So verse 33. So Joab told the king what Absalom had said. Then at last David summoned Absalom, 5 years, who came and bowed low before the king, and the king kissed him. So finally. But here's the thing. Did David put this meeting together? No, Absalom had to force this meeting with his father. Okay, he had to set royal fields on fire. A chief of staff had to intervene for this all to happen. So anyway, he bows low before his king. The king kissed him. It never says they had a conversation. There's not one word in here that Absalom asked for forgiveness, or David said, I forgive you, or why did you do it, or anything. This is just it. Now, another year is going to pass. You know what Absalom's going to do during this next year? We're going to read it, but he's going to stand at the gate. Now, the gate is where, that was the courthouse back then, all right? If you had a beef with somebody, you went to the gate. And that's where the judges were. That's why you had gatekeepers. You ever heard of that? Mm-hmm. That's why you had gatekeepers at the gate. So what happened, Absalom spends the next year undermining his father. Every day he goes and he stands at the gate. And that's where people would come for help. That was where people would come for justice. And Absalom would say to them, you know what, you've got a good case. I feel for you. I feel your pain. All right? But you can't, the king's not here. King's not, where's the king's men? There's no way you can get to the king. The systems is broken. But I want you to know, if I was in charge, I'd take care of this for you. If I was in charge, you'd have some justice in the land. And remember, Absalom looks like what? You'd vote for him in a heartbeat. Because, he was handsome. He was full of charisma. His dad was full of charisma. And people would bow before him, and he would raise them up. And in fact, this 2 Samuel 15 verse 3 says, and Absalom will say, you really got a strong case here. It's too bad the king doesn't have anyone to hear it. I wish I were the judge. Then everyone could bring their cases to me for judgment, and I would give them justice. When people tried to bow before him, Absalom wouldn't let them. He's a man of the people. Instead, he took them by the hand and kissed them. Absalom with 5 pounds of hair on his head. You think the ladies lined up? Just handsome. Absalom, it's like Fabio is giving out kisses at Costco's or something. Absalom did this with everyone who came to the king for judgment, and so he stole the hearts of all the people of Israel. And he seized power. Verse 13, a messenger soon arrived in Jerusalem to tell David, all Israel has joined Absalom in a conspiracy against you. Then we must flee at once, or it will be too late, David urged his men. Hurry, if we get out of the city before Absalom arrives, both we and the city of Jerusalem will be spared from disaster. We are with you, the advisors replied. Do what you think is best. And here, look at this. Even when it comes down to Absalom, it's going to take the kingdom away from David. David still won't stand and confront his son. He's still running. He's still running. This isn't the David that I knew that faced Goliath. How about you? This is a totally different guy. So the king and all his household set out at once. Verse 14. He left no one behind except 10 of his concubines to look after the palace. The king and all his people set out on foot, pausing at the last house. To let all the king's men move past to lead the way. So there was 600 men from Gath who had come with David along with the king's bodyguard. Now there's 12,000 people in the army of Israel. David now has 600. So things have kind of come full circle, haven't they? Verse 30, David walked up the road to the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and his feet were bare as a sign of mourning. And the people who were with him covered their heads and wept as they climbed the hill. See, a lot of stuff happened on the Mount of Olives, not just with Jesus. When someone told David that his advisor, Ahithophel, now remember Ahithophel, I'd like to know more about this guy, was now backing Absalom, David prayed, "O Lord, let Ahithophel give Absalom foolish advice." So, now David, the king, is in exile. He's running for his life because of his son. And this is a very sordid story. Verse 15, Meanwhile, Absalom and all the army of Israel arrived at Jerusalem, accompanied by Ahithophel. So this Ahithophel guy is popping up. So there's something going to happen with him. Then Absalom turned to Ahithophel and asked him, "What should I do next?" And Ahithophel told him, "Go and sleep with your father's concubines, for he has left them here to look after the palace. Then all Israel will know that you have insulted your father beyond hope of reconciliation, and they will throw their support to you." So they set up a tent on the palace roof. Understand, it's not a tent like we think of. It's like a covering, an awning. That's more the word, okay? So it's not like they're doing this in private. Everybody can see what's going on. Remember, the palace was the highest building. Remember, that's how come he could see Bathsheba? So they set up a tent, this awning, on the palace roof where everyone could see it. And Absalom went and had sex with his father's concubines. See, they didn't need Netflix back then. They didn't need HBO. Hey, let's just go down to the palace, and let's watch Absalom have sex with all of King David's concubines. That's right. Bring the kids. Back at lunch, Mabel. So anyway, but Absalom said, "No, I will not disgrace my father in such a way. No, that's not what Absalom did. That's what he should have done. Verse 23, Absalom followed Ahithophel's advice, just as David had done. For every word Ahithophel spoke seemed as wise as though it had come directly from the mouth of God. And I bet until today, most of you, Gary may have, but most of you probably have never heard of Ahithophel. And this guy was the wisest. This guy, besides Solomon, he was one of the wisest guys in the whole Bible. Let's see what it is. What happens to him. So, the word there in Aramaic is pavilion. Okay, I was trying to think awning. It's like this, so it's like a pavilion, like it's awning. Okay, so inside of all of Israel, boy, you talk about wanting to get back at his dad. This is the most degrading, the most humiliating way that he could get back at his father. He wants to let everybody know who is now in charge. Do you think there's a lot of hurt inside this Absalom? My goodness. This is the most in-your-face thing that he can do, and it's bad, and it's wrong, and it's flowing out of a broken, twisted, confused heart. Imagine what happens to David when he hears about this. Where in the world did Absalom learn to treat women this way? You know, I just don't understand this, Pastor Lynn. I really don't. You know, I just don't. By the way, we've actually talked about this story with our boys, remember? Because one of them said, Dad, what's a concubine? I said, it's like a porcupine. Go ask your mother. It's like a corpse. It's not like a porcupine. Go ask your mother. Anyway. So now David's fleeing for his life. He'd been there before when he was young, and King Saul was old. Now David is the old man, and Absalom is the young one. Now David, who was a warrior from a youth, now David, who has led so many campaigns against so many enemies, has to lead one more campaign. And this one is against who? His own son. Look what's happened to David's life, folks, from when we started this thing. Remember when Samuel was born? And now we've come full circle to this. Okay, now we're going to skip down to 2 Samuel. We're going to go to the 17th chapter, verse 17. Now Ahithophel urged Absalom, let me choose 12,000 men to start out after David tonight. How many men does David have? 600. Ahithophel wants to send 12,000. Is that a little bit of an overkill? Yeah. Little bit. Ahithophel says, listen, if we're going to do something, let's do it right. Let's make sure that he is dead. So let me choose 12,000 men to start out after David tonight. I will catch up with him while he is weary and discouraged. He and his troops will panic, and everyone will run away. Then I will kill only the king, and I will bring all the people back to you as a bride returns to her husband. After all, it is only one man's life that you seek. Then you will be at peace with all the people. The plan seemed good to Absalom and to all the elders of Israel. Actually, that is a very good plan. But then Absalom said, bring in Hushai the Archite. Let's see what he thinks about this. When Hushai arrived, Absalom told him what Ahithophel had said, and then he asked, what's your opinion? Should we follow Ahithophel's advice? If not, what do you suggest? Well, Hushai replied to Absalom, this time Ahithophel has made a mistake. You know your father and his men. They're mighty warriors. Right now, they are as enraged as a mother bear who has been robbed of her cubs. Now, they're not. Remember, David's weeping, sackcloth, ashes, barefoot. And remember that your father is an experienced man of war. He won't be spending the night among his troops. He is probably already hidden in some pit or cave. And when he comes out and attacks and a few of your men fall, there will be a panic among your troops. And the word will spread that Absalom's men are being slaughtered. Then even the bravest soldiers, though they have the heart of a lion, will be paralyzed with fear. For all Israel knows what a mighty warrior your father is and how courageous his men are. I recommend that you mobilize the entire army of Israel, bring them from as far away as Dan in the north and Beersheba in the south. This way you'll have an army as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And I advise that you personally lead the troops. When we find David, we'll fall on him like dew that falls on the ground. Then neither he nor any of his men will be left alive. And if David were to escape into some town, you will have all Israel there at your command. Then we can take ropes and drag the walls of the town into the nearest valley until every stone is torn down. A little different between the two advisors, isn't there? Then Absalom and all the men of Israel said, Hushai's advice is better than Ahithophel's. Actually, if they had followed Ahithophel's advice, they probably would have killed David. But remember, David had prayed for God to muddy the advice, that they would not follow the advice of Ahithophel. So this is God. By the way, this is kind of interesting because it says that Absalom and all the men of Israel said, Hushai's advice is better than Ahithophel's. For the Lord had determined to defeat the counsel of Ahithophel, which really was the better plan, so that he could bring disaster on Absalom. So here in this story, we now have a little glimpse of some spiritual warfare that's going on. Okay? And you have this when we see this all the time when somebody will go, oh, this is a great idea, let's do it. And then one person will go, well, you know, wait a minute. Anyway, we have one of those in our family. Hushai told Zadok and Abiathar the priest what Ahithophel said to Absalom and the elders of Israel and what he himself had advised. Instead, quick, he told them, find David and urge him not to stay in the shallows of the Jordan River tonight. He must go across at once into the wilderness beyond, otherwise he would die and his entire army with him, because now there's 27,000 troops getting ready to march on him. When Ahithophel realized that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey, went to his hometown, set his affairs in order, and hanged himself. Don't you wish we knew more about Ahithophel? This is a guy, he believed in himself. He knew he was right, and he was right. He was a wise man. They said he spoke like God himself when he spoke. And Ahithophel said, well, if they're not going to follow my advice, then forget this. And he killed himself. In fact, this is one of the, remember I said there was 7 suicides in the Bible? This is one of them. And he died there and was buried in the family tomb. David soon arrived at Mahanaim. By now, Absalom had mobilized the entire army of Israel and was leading his troops across the Jordan River. Chapter 18. Now, David now mustered the men who were with him and appointed generals and captains to lead them. He sent the troops out in 3 groups, so there's 200 in each group, placing one group under Joab, one under Joab's brother, Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and one under Ittai, the man from Gath. The king told his troops, I'm going out with you. But his men objected strongly. You must not go, they urged. If we have to turn and run, and even if half of us die, it will make no difference to Absalom's troops. They'll be looking only for you. You are worth 10,000 of us, and it is better that you stay here in the town and send help if we need it. If you think that's the best plan, I'll do it, the king answered. So he stood alongside the gate of the town as all the troops marched out in groups of hundreds and thousands. And the king gave this command to Joab, Abishai, and Ittai. For my sake, deal gently with young Absalom. And all the troops heard the king give this order to his commanders. So the battle began. Verse 6. So the battle began in the forest of Ephraim. And the Israelite troops, now how many of them? Probably over 20,000 troops, if they called, because there's 12,000 troops in the north plus the army from the south. And the Israelite troops were beaten back by David's men. 600 men beat them back. Because let me tell you something. Joab was one of the greatest military commanders of all time. David was a military genius. I mean, they just outwitted Absalom and his generals. And the thing about it is that he didn't have his best men because he'd already hung himself. So anyway, verse 8, the battle raged all across the countryside, and more men died because of the forest than were killed by the sword. Now we have no idea what that means. We don't. Nobody knows. It just says more were killed because of the forest than were killed by the sword, and that's just something they stuck in there. But anyway, there's this big battle, and David's soldiers they think that maybe there was support for David, but they didn't join David's army. But they were all hiding in the forest. So when Absalom's troops went into the forest, then they killed him. So there's a big battle, and David's soldiers won't let him go into it. They said it's too risky. So David's not at the battle. Understand that. David's having to wait for someone to bring word of the battle, whether he won or lost or what happened. So finally, someone comes back to him and says, your throne is safe. Your kingdom is secure. The rebel is dead. Now here's when it gets so heartbroken. Because remember, they said the heart of the king went out yearning for Absalom. Absalom never knew this. David never told him. But the thing about it is, remember what was the last thing that David said to his generals when they left? Be gentle with the young man Absalom. Now I want you to notice something. So every time we've seen David in this story address Absalom, what's the one word that David has never used? Son. Isn't that something? He calls him young man, this man. He never once calls him son. Be gentle with the young man Absalom. All right, let's see how this thing ends up. Verse 9. During the battle, Absalom happened to come upon some of David's men. He tried to escape on his mule, but as he rode beneath the thick branches of a great tree, his hair got caught in the tree. His mule kept going and left him dangling in the air. One of David's men saw what had happened and told Joab, I saw Absalom dangling from a great tree. Now, when I try to picture this, that's got to be painful. No, obviously it's nothing I'm never going to have to worry about. But it's just Absalom is hanging there from 5 pounds of hair, swinging. And I'm sure he's trying to, get his hair up and everything and all. So anyway, one of David's men saw it happen. He goes to Joab. I saw Absalom dangling from a great tree. What? Joab demanded. You saw him there and didn't kill him? I would have rewarded you with 10 pieces of silver and a hero's belt. This soldier, he's a smart guy, he said, I wouldn't kill the king's son for even 1,000 pieces of silver. The man replied to Joab, we all heard the king say to you and Abishai and Ittai, for my sake, please spare young Absalom. And if I had betrayed the king by killing his son, and the king would certainly find out who did it, you yourself would be the first to abandon me. Enough of this nonsense, Joab said. Then he took 3 daggers and plunged them into Absalom's heart as he dangled still alive in the great tree. 10 of Joab's young armor bearers then surrounded Absalom and killed him. Then Joab blew the ram's horn, and his men returned from chasing the army of Israel. They threw Absalom's body into a deep pit in the forest and piled a great heap of stones over it. And all of Israel fled to their homes. When the battle's over, a messenger comes running to him. David's first question was not, if you read this, how did the battle go? His first question is the young man Absalom safe? First question. He can't say, is my son safe? And it says 3 messengers came to David. The first messenger would not tell him. The second messenger wouldn't tell him, is the young man Absalom safe? And finally, the third messenger comes and says the rebel is dead. And now, as always happens, clarity finally comes to David. Way too late at this point, right? All the stubbornness and pride and hardness is just shattered in David's life. And the text says, the king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. Shaken because he suddenly sees so clearly the life that was entrusted to him. He sees that baby that he held so long ago in the way only a parent will. He sees a child who adored his father. In this story, that's the one thing that comes through. Absalom wanted his dad's attention so badly. He remembered, do you think Absalom grew up playing soldier? Do you think Absalom grew up playing David and Goliath? I guarantee he did. And he played the part of his daddy. He wanted to be like his daddy. I guarantee Absalom growing up, his daddy was a hero to him. And he remembers the bitterly disillusioned brother, the misguided rebel. And David thinks of all he could have been, but he never will be. And he thinks of the father that he wanted to be, that he might have been, but he never was. And I bet David is now thinking about all the stupid choices that he made, all the wrong roads that he went down, all the words that he should have said to Absalom, but he didn't. And finally, he pronounces the word that he could not bring himself to say all these years. And when you read this, it's like he can't stop saying the word now. It's like he's been storing it up all these years, and now he has to say it over and over and over, even though his heart breaks every time he says it. It's verse 33. Oh, my son Absalom, my son, Absalom. If only I had died instead of you, oh Absalom, my son, my son. I think part of why his heart was breaking is he wondered how this old sad story would have turned out if he had just said that one word to Absalom. If he had just one time recognized Absalom as his son. If he had just one time said, my son, I'm your father, and you're my son. We're going to talk about what's in our hearts. I'm going to tell you about my life. I'm going to tell you about my choices. I'm going to tell you about my sorrow. I want to tell you where I went so far wrong. I want to tell you how I messed up, because I want to guide you to a better way. I want to ask you to forgive me, my son. Oh, my son. My son, my son, my son. You think David would have died for Absalom? Oh my goodness, yeah. But that's not what he's being asked to do. You know, it doesn't help to be willing to die for love if you won't give it a little bit every day. You know that? If you won't give it every day, a little bit, day by day by day. It's amazing to me how often I'll talk particularly with men as they get older. And I'm sure Pastor James has probably had these same conversations. Because you usually have it on the golf course, or usually you have it in the ICU unit in the hospital. And they'll say something like, you know, when my kids were growing up, I was just so busy. I was just so busy. My job, I had to travel. I just had to travel. I had to travel. And now I'd give anything to have those years over. And you know what you say to them at that point? It's too late. It's too late. You want to hear the end of the story? The end of the story of David? Isn't this kind of sad that David's story kind of has an end on this note? Now we go to 1 Kings 1. We've now told the story of David, 1st, 2nd Samuel. So in 1 Kings 1, the first chapter, first verse, we now have the end of David. King David was now very old, and no matter how many blankets covered him, he could not keep warm. So his advisors told him, let us find a young virgin to wait on you and look after you, my lord. She will lie in your arms and keep you warm. How long do you think David had to think about that idea? Okay, let's give that a try. That sounds pretty good. So, women, the way they were treated.
Well, they didn't have electric blankets.
That's electric blankets, that's right. Absolutely, I wasn't going to get into this, but I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to get into it. Because there was a certain function that if a king could no longer do it, he would no longer be king. That's all I'm going to say. So they searched throughout the land of Israel for a beautiful girl. And they found Abishag from Shunem and brought her to the king. By the way, she's one of the most beautiful girls. You know, have you ever heard any girl named Abishag? You know what? Wouldn't that be cool to name your daughter, granddaughter Abishag? You're named after one of the most beautiful girls in the Bible. And they'll go, why did you do this to me? Okay, but anyway. They found Abishag from Shunem and brought her to the king. The girl was very beautiful, and she looked after the king and took care of him. But the king had no sexual relations with her. Couldn't have them. King David responded. Call Bathsheba. Y'all remember Bathsheba? So finally now at the end, David says, last thing David does, he says, call Bathsheba. So she came back in and stood before the king. And the king repeated his vow. As surely as the Lord lives, who has rescued me from every danger, your son Solomon will be the next king, and will sit on my throne this very day, just as I vowed to you before the Lord, the God of Israel. Remember, Amnon was going to be the next king. Then Absalom was going to be the next king. But David, many years ago, had promised to Bathsheba that their son Solomon would be king. So now David is having to keep that promise. Then Bathsheba bowed down with her face to the ground before the king and exclaimed, May the Lord King David live forever. And And then 1 Kings 2. Then David died and was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. David had reigned over Israel for 40 years, 7 of them in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. Solomon became king and sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established. And that's the story of David. You know, when we get to the end of David's life, think of all the dozens of ways that David could have died during his 40-year reign. Lions, I mean, remember when he was watching the sheep and they were attacked by bears and lions and probably tigers, oh my. You know, but you know, he could have been killed. Goliath could have killed him easily. Remember when Saul was throwing spears at him? You know, he could have speared the young musician, you know, playing the harp. The king's men that were hunting him, deranged king's men, were hunting him down, remember? As he hid out in the countryside, and the list goes. He could have died at the hands of the Philistines. He could have died, remember Nabal, the idiot? He could have died at the hand of Nabal's men. The Ammonites, even his sons. But he didn't. He didn't. Instead of experiencing, because I'll be honest with you, when I thought we'd come to the end of David, it was going to be another great story how David died. I really did. But instead of experiencing this, David died without drama. He died with many blessings because God blessed his servant with a heart that beat long enough to do what God wanted him to do, including establishing peace in the land. Remember, David was not allowed to build the temple for the Ark of the Covenant because of his sin, but instead of being bitter, David then gathered up all the materials that would be needed so that Solomon could now build the temple. And at the very end, he made sure that there was going to be a smooth transition of power from David to Solomon. So, it's a good way to go. Now, the story of David really doesn't end there, does it? Because David was physically related to somebody else that's going to pop up in the Bible. A distant relative of David's. Y'all may have heard of him. His name is Jesus. Jesus, remember, it was through his relationship with David that established Jesus' claim to David's throne as king of Israel. And David's earthly kingdom was the forerunner for the eternal kingdom over which Jesus Christ will one day rule. So the last time that we find the name of David mentioned is away over in the New Testament, Luke 1, verse 30. Then the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bring forth a son, and shall call his name Jesus. He will be great, he'll be called the Son of the Highest, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his father," who? David. Give him the throne of his father David. "And he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there'll be no end." That's a great ending to the story of David. So let's bow together. Let's pray. God, you are the one who heals our regrets. And no matter how broken a situation may be, a relationship, a family, you bring wholeness and you bring mercy. And thank you, Father, that David's story continues in the New Testament, and that the house of David, that you will rule over, and it'll be a kingdom that we'll be under forever and ever. Be with us till we meet together again. We pray this name in Jesus. Amen.